Hey, welcome everybody to video number 10 in the UE5 vehicle tutorial series. This video is part 1 of many concerning the vehicle AI. I am going to split that topic into many videos, well many, hopefully 4 or 5 videos, because that is a huge topic to cover and nobody likes sitting through a 5-hour long tutorial. So for everybody's sake, I'm going to split this up into hopefully less than 30-minute videos. Alright? So today what we're going to do is just basically lay out the foundation for the AI, which means creating a spline blueprint that we can put on the map, make a spline track out of it, and have the car follow that. And when I say follow it, I mean very basic, just steady 20 miles per hour, steer toward the track so you don't get off of it, and we'll make it more complicated as we go in the following videos. Okay, let's get started with that. Go into our tutorial folder here, right click, create a new blueprint, which is going to be a child of the actor class. Let's call that BP spline tutorial. Okay, open that up. Go ahead and add a spline to it, like so. And that is all you have to do for now. Let's keep that open for a minute here. Let's place that in the map. Now for those of you who've never worked with a spline before, that is your starting position. You probably want to place that on your starting line in your racetrack, because that's going to be the 0 position into your spline, which is going to be important in the future for the lap system. But also we're going to be checking how far along the spline a vehicle is to tell which vehicle is ahead of which, to you know, just know which vehicle is first, second, or third for the end race, and just for the leaderboard as well. And also getting the distance in between each vehicles to be able to display that into the UI for the player to see. And yeah, just basically make a habit of having that first point onto your starting line. Then you can alt drag from it to create new points. Let's go ahead and make sort of an oval shape, sort of kind of. Okay, stop whatever you're doing. Please don't lag on me like that. Okay, phew, saved it. Okay, now this looks more like a diamond. Let's go ahead and play with the tangents. Let's make that nice, roundish oval. Now again, open up the blueprint for that spline and make it a closed loop. So select the spline. You have here into the spline section, closed loop. You're going to want to check that, compile and save it, and you now have yourself a closed loop. I like to keep that for last, because designing your spline with a closed loop is a little bit of a pain. So with your oval laid out here, you are ready to start in the AI controller for the car. Now, like I said, this blueprint is going to get pretty complicated in the future. That's why I made it a blueprint instead of just placing a spline component onto the map. But for now, let's just leave it at that. Go ahead, right click, blueprint, type in AI in the search box, look for an AI controller, create one of those, call it BP AI tutorial. Okay, let's right away put a car in the map, assign that controller to it. This is our Porsche blueprint I'm using for these tutorials. Let's have it face that spline right here. Let's go here into the detail panel. Auto pose as AI should be placed in world by default. Just make sure it is. Also in the controller class, let's go with BP AI controller, which is the one we just created. and we're ready to start working on that right away. Actually, I almost forgot. Let's first go into the Porsche blueprint. And we are gonna need to, into the event graph here, on the event tick, we're handling the vehicle input in a bit of an unusual way, because I like to do it that way. And so, as a consequence, we need to make sure the AI isn't trying to drive the car with these inputs happening here. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna put the sound function first, because we want to do that for the AI or the player, it doesn't matter. And after we handle the sound, we're gonna add a little branch. The condition of that branch is going to be is player controlled. We'll plug that here into the condition. And if we are controlled by a player, then we handle vehicle input and camera input as well. And if we're not, like when the AI is possessing the car, that node's here return false, and the AI is free to handle the input into the AI controller itself. If you don't do that, nothing's gonna happen, and you're gonna be in trouble. Again, we'll keep it simple for this video just to get you started, get your car moving, and then we'll build on top of that in the later videos. So first thing you want to do here in Beg and Play is find your track blueprint. So get actor of class. Now if you read the description, that is going to return a reference to the first actor it finds in the level of that specified class, which we only need one because we're not going to spawn 2, 3 of those in the level. So this is AI spline blueprint, and let's get the spline component out of that. Get spline, very bottom of the list here is your spline component, and let's create a variable pointing to that so we can use it. Spline is fine, so we can use it later in the graph in a lot of places. Let us also get a reference to our vehicle that this AI controller is controlling, because we'll need to set inputs on it. So get controlled pawn, like so. And again, drag off of that, cast it to our car blueprint, which in my case is going to be the Porsche 911 tutorial. And let us set a variable for that as well. Now the reason I do that all the time is because you don't want to be doing that cast on the event tick, because that's unnecessary, and you know, it's bad practice. You really only want to do that cast once, set a variable, and then never cast again. So let's call that controlled car. Alright. So that's it for begin play. Now into the event tick, we are going to get our variable for the car, and let us start with throttle. Set throttle input onto its vehicle movement component, like that. Now if I set this to 1, it's just going to go full throttle all the time, which is basically going to accelerate it until it reaches max speed. Let's not do that. Alright, let's actually have it top at a set speed, like I said earlier, at let's say 20 miles an hour. So let's create a new variable, call it target speed, make that a float variable, then compile to be able to give it a default value before we forget to do it. Let's set that to 20. Now again, in the future, the speed is going to be determined by how fast you want the car to be going, also multiplied or divided or just otherwise affected by the curves ahead of it, because you need to slow down to take some curves. And yeah, but for now let's just get the car moving. Okay, yeah. Let's get the movement component here. Get the speed that the car is actually going at. Let's get that in mile per hour just to be consistent with the UI. Let's get our target speed here of 20 mile per hour. And we want to subtract from our target speed. We want to subtract the speed we're actually going at. So if the target speed is 20 and we're going 5 miles an hour, 20 minus 5 gives us 15, which is a nice positive value. And if otherwise, if we're going 25 and our target speed is 20, we get negative 5. That means we need to slow down. So we're going to map that. We need an output of 0 to 1, because that's what the throttle input here is asking for, range of 0 to 1. And just for good measure, let's say from 0, meaning we're going the same speed as the speed we want, we're not adding any input. And if we're any more or less than 5 miles an hour difference, then we'll add full throttle. Okay? And that should give us a steady speed of 20 miles an hour. Not any less, not any more. Let's confirm that with a print string. Make sure everything works before we move on further. Now, a print string, I like to get fancy with them. We're going to be calling it every tick here because we're setting the input, so we need to be using event tick. And I don't want a whole 1,000 of them on the screen for no reason. So let's just set a key to it. Let's call it speed. Any key will do. And what that does is that every time you call a print string, it'll override any print string already on the screen that has the same key. And so you only get one of them. Let's get the speed here. Plug that into our print string. Let's actually round it first, so we get a nice round number. Don't need 20 decimal. Don't need that kind of accuracy for just displaying it. Let's go with that. Now I've put the BP portion 11 tutorial, which is the right one. I've set the controller to it. There's a spline. It should find that spline. Let's go into that little 3 dots here. Hit simulate. And as you can see here, our vehicle is accelerating until it reaches 20, which is the target speed, and then it maintains that speed. Now it's not braking, so if it were to go downhill and go past 20, it wouldn't hit the brakes to slow down to 20. We're gonna set that later on as well to be able to slow down before the curbs, so we don't miss them. But for now, that is going to be perfect. Actually, I should have checked that error. You need to address those errors right away. You don't want to wait for them to pile up. Access none, trying to read. Set spline. Oh, wait a minute. That is BP spline tutorial. I might have cast to the wrong one. Yep. I've cast to the one I'm using off camera to make my tests before recording tutorials. Let's go ahead and search for tutorial. And that would be BP spline tutorial. Sorry about that. It gets confusing to have 2 of everything. Now that variable won't be good anymore. Let's delete that and that. Okay, that gets us rid of the error. That variable is now useless because it's casting to the wrong one. So let's do that again. Get our spline. Get spline. Promote that to a variable, which is going to be called spline, which is perfect. Okay, we need that pretty badly for the steering part, which is next. And that is why you test your blueprints often, so that you can tell right away when they don't work, before you have a whole bunch of blueprints in there and you don't have any idea where the errors come from. So let's go ahead and try that again, just to make sure I've got rid of all the errors. There you go. That's why you should never ignore those error messages. You want to get rid of them as soon as they pop up. Otherwise, if you let them pile up, you're going to get lost real fast. Okay, so now we have a constant speed. Let's go ahead and really delete that print string and take care of the steering part now. Yeah, alright. Drag off of that. Set steering. Steering input. Now this is where it gets a little bit more complex. Nothing too fancy, but a little more than what we're used to, because obviously AI is going to be pretty darn complex. Let's clean that up a little bit right away before we add too much to it. Okay, now for the steering much, we need to get the spline, because we're going to get a position onto that spline, which is going to be our target position that we have to steer to. Alright, and we're going to do that by finding key closest to world location. World position being obviously the position of the car, which is our controlled car here. Get actor location, that's the one we want. Put that in there. And then once we found our key here, we want to know how far along the spline that key is. So we're going to get distance along spline at input key. Alright. Now you could compare those for every car in the map. Again, like I said, to know how far ahead every car is onto the spline. But right now we're only using it for steering. So that's going to return the closest position onto the spline to our vehicle. We are going to add to this an offset, which is going to be how far ahead we want to look on the spline. Right now let's set that to 10 meters or 1000 centimeters. We are going to increase this to look further and further away as we speed up, to be able to predict the curves and steer in advance, to be able to both cut corners and also steer, early enough that we're not gonna understeer and hit the walls basically outside of the track. Now that we have this, we want to get a location at the distance along spline here. We want this to be a world position location. So coordinate space here should be world, like so. Our distance is going to be the location of the car plus our offset. And that location is our steering target. We're going to call it that. So we want to get here, we want to get a get look Okay, find relative look at rotation. That's going to give us a value from minus 180 to positive 180. For that, we need the transform of our car here. Get transform, get active transform. That's going to be our starting point. Then the location we want to get the angle for is the steering target right here. Let's split that so we can only get the z-axis. And now this is what we are going to map to get our steering angle. We're going to map this a lot like we mapped the speed. So here you add a map range. Plug that into the steering input. Again, steering is going to be ranging from -1 to 1. So let's set that here into our map range, -1 to 1. Now the range here, again, minus 180 is behind the car, and positive 180 is also behind the car, while minus 90 would be perfectly sideways. We don't need that much range. The car is actually, it's got a maximum steering of, I think, 60 degrees it was. So let's use that here in the range, minus 60 to 60. So again, let's say you have a forward vector for the car, and you check the position on the track ahead of the car, and it's slightly to the left. You're going to get a negative value here, and that's going to set your steering to the left. A little bit or a lot, depending on the angle. And I believe that will be enough. Just for fun, let's actually add a sphere trace here. Sphere trace, whichever one, it doesn't matter. Let's set the radius to 400. Start position and end position here should be our steering target location. Let's make that draw debug for one frame, since we're doing this on event tick, or every frame. And that really, the only purpose is just to have a visual aid to see that point, because we might need to later on while we tweak some variables to make the steering correct. Now again, let's check to make sure that's working before we do anything else. Alright. Now you can see I set my spline backward, which is kind of a rookie mistake, but that's perfectly fine. It works all the same. As you can see, 10 meters isn't that long, so it's not really cutting the corners, and it's really not going fast enough for that. But you can see it follows the spline just fine at that speed. Let's actually show you how that works, that little offset here. So that's my 0 of the spline. Yeah, I really messed up on the placement of that spline. Oh wow. Okay, let's stop that. Let's go back into the blueprint here and set our distance here to, let's say, 10,000 instead. So let's add another 0 in here, and whatever, let's actually make that a variable, because we're going to have to mess with it a lot later on. Promote to variable. That is going to be steer prediction distance. If I can write, please. Speed prediction distance, because we're going to get also a throttle prediction distance, which is going to be different. And I believe that's it. Now I've set that to 10,000, so the default value, yep, 10,000. Now you can see it's looking a lot further away, and for some reason we're not seeing the spline anymore, so we can't really tell. That's odd. I want to see it. Oh, come on, don't be like this. Where's my spline? You were working just fine not 20 seconds ago. What are you doing? I hate you. I really do. Oh wow, you have to unselect it for it to show up. Alright, now you can see it. It's looking ahead so far. It's not even following the track anymore. Alright, so you need to be careful and not overdo that. Also, as you can see here, when it reaches the start, it's not looking any further than 0.0, which is kind of weird. So that's why you need that to be your starting line, because usually that's going to be in a straight line, so you won't actually notice the AI not looking ahead anymore. I know it's a bit of a hack. There's probably a fix for that, but it really doesn't matter. You won't notice it at all. So okay, let's set that back to a reasonable value so I don't forget about it when I record the next tutorial. And that is going to be it for this video. Now you've got what is most likely the most boring vehicle AI ever made. That's fine, you have to start somewhere, and this right here is where you start. So you have a spline to follow. You have a steering that allows you to steer the car toward it. And you got this, which is giving you a steady 20 miles per hour. Not very exciting, but it'll be more exciting once we mess with it a little more in the the next videos. So I reckon part 2 should be to actually make that speed here depending on the curves of the track. And again, if you increase the speed, you need to be looking further away from the car to be able to predict the curves in order to steer correctly. So we're going to have a lot of map range and whatnot in here, and that's going to be pretty complicated, but it's worth it. So okay, I'm going to stop it at that for today. I think that was long enough of a video for one day. Again, if you enjoy my content, please consider subscribing to my Patreon, as that helps me a lot. Also, check the video description for the Discord server. You can join that. Again, I'll answer pretty much any questions you might have, and I will see you soon.